Does anybody hear? Yes. Okay. So here we go. Okay. So let's just, gosh, I'm sorry. Like keeps wanting to go to the donation slide. I'm telling you. Hey, Motto, we hear you. I think they heard you too. So I am I'd like to start before we formally begin the program, and I offer a formal introduction of our guest speaker. I want to do a land acknowledgement and commitment. At the Amato Kai Initiative respectfully acknowledges the original peoples of the lands on which our office sits and from which many of us are zooming. For thousands of years and hundreds of generations, the Eastern Pomo and Lake Miwok people actively stewarded these lands to ensure they provided for all living things. We benefit from that stewardship in a myriad of ways. Today, we acknowledge the historical and ongoing impact of white settler colonization on Indigenous peoples of this place and recognize our responsibility to be in genuine solidarity with them in addressing and transforming the impacts of colonization toward a more just, liberatory, and sustainable future. At AKI, we go a step further than a land acknowledgement to pledge our commitment to the work of resisting and challenging white settler colonialism and various structures of power, domination, and exploitation that it enables and are rooted in. We strive to listen, learn, and support with humility from Indigenous communities at the forefront of asserting their sovereignty and preserving their traditional knowledge towards restoring humanity's relationship with the land and all the living things it sustains and supports. Now I get to introduce our guest, our featured diva, Jamie Cardenas, who is a Filipinx Ilocana herbalist, multidisciplinary artist, cultural worker, and weaver of Inabel. She is the heart and hands behind Magpie Alchemy and her passion project, the Ayat Project. Daughter of Jaime Galinato Cardenas and Angelita Pesquisa Cardenas, she comes from a line of stewards of the land, of healers and storytellers. She shares her gift of plant medicine from her grandmother's ancestral knowledge and prayers of supporting their community with healing and celebrating their skin and keeping them in touch with their body and senses with the magic of plants. In an effort to excavate their cultural identity, she discovered their middle name translates to research and last name translates to blue. Jamie sees their connection to plants as a bridge to their ancestors. Welcome, Jamie. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you haven't been in the best of health of late, so let's just dive in. You're here to talk about healing and talk about healing from a decolonial lens. So tell me how do you define it, Jamie? How do you define decolonial healing? And what led you on this journey?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone that's in this space. I know it's, you guys are just arriving here probably off of work. I do want to say that some of the stuff that we're going to talk about is going to be, it may be triggering, and I'm also going to give a disclaimer that I'm not a health professional. But basically, I started my decolonial journey and into wellness because I am disabled and I have not been well, and I've been trying to find answers for myself. I think a lot of folks don't realize that the medical industry is still an institution, and I learned trying to navigate the healthcare system that that one size fits all. When you don't fit into those boxes, it can be very difficult. So I think most of you know me as the owner and operator of Magpie Alchemy. And really, I started Magpie because, again, I was looking for answers for myself and trying to be well. I didn't realize that I was actually taking a decolonial approach to my wellness until I started speaking to other Pinays, to other Filipinas, and realizing that, gosh, the answers that I'm trying to look for aren't going to be found in the Western healthcare system. They aren't going to be found through Western medicine at all. And I've had to really like go within myself and go back into like the root of the problem, which is, you know, imperialism, capitalism, all the isms. Um, and it's been very difficult. Robyn has mentioned that like we had to reschedule. Um, and I'm so thankful that I have spaces like this where I can be honest and I can be real. And there's grace and flexibility, which I think is very much a decolonial way of operating. Um, yeah, that's how I'll answer that question.
Yeah, and I should mention to everybody in this space with us. So we envision this as a conversation that I actually get to participate in as well. So I'm both kind of facilitator but participant also in the convo. And please, as questions come up, please post them to the chat. Are you okay with that, Jamie? Actually, we didn't really talk about that piece, but
Yeah.
are you okay with like kind of fielding questions as they come? I mean, Jamie and I checked in, and so we have questions we want to explore together. But we also want to be able to open up space for folks to either share their experiences, but also to be able to ask questions. So if you're okay with being fluid in that way, Jamie, I'm good. Otherwise, we can also kind of go back to our initial thinking, which was those questions and then like a Q&A. So
yeah, I'm open to that.
okay, awesome. Okay. So we're going to keep it kind of chill and conversational, y'all, because this is the point. We want to be able to just show up as we are, to hold space for these sometimes really hard conversations. And yeah, so I guess a question for myself, how do I define decolonial healing and what led you on this journey? It's kind of interesting. I feel like I think when I first thought about how I would answer this question, Jamie, I think initially I was only going to focus on my most recent decolonial healing journey, which really was with respect to kind of healing my heart and just mental health, kind of seeking out support for my mental health after the loss of a model, which really devastated me. But, I think that as I think about it now, which is interesting when I think about just a general kind of approach to maybe physical health in particular, and a kind of decolonial approach, I would probably say was my dad, actually, which is funny because my mom was a nurse. So, on one hand, I had my mom who was very much, trained in the Western tradition, was working in the Western tradition. I think also had a lot of skepticism about it. And yet that was also, what she did. She was a nurse at a hospital. But my dad brought a very different sensibility to physical health and wellness, always very, very skeptical about it. And he always, always, always sought out a natural remedy versus before ever seeking out kind of over the counter or prescription kind of medication at a pharmacy. That was always the last, So I remember I had a chronic case of eczema when I was a child. And it seemed like nothing could resolve it, and I just remember my dad coming up with all sorts of concoctions. He had, would rub coconut oil. He did, and I had oh yeah, it's also because I sucked my thumb for a very long time. Oh, this is interesting. So I remember my dad like rubbing like sile, labuyo, or like the tiny little hot peppers on my thumb and ginger to keep doing that. It was always like that, or like yeah, trying to solve my eczema with different kinds of with coconut oil and sort of homemade sort of salves, I guess, that he would concoct together with my grandma. My Lola, she was a Hilot practitioner, and Hilot was, the way I understood it, not something that other people did. Hilot was something that was passed on in the family. it was one of those skills that, you just necessarily had to have, just like you needed to know how to cook, or, just life skills. You should know how to swim. I mean, there's sort of basic life skills, right? That I think I came up growing up, believing in, and that was practiced in our home, and Hila was one of them. And, I remember how she would do, kind of work energy, because I remember Hila not always being actual touch. Sometimes it was. Sometimes my Lola would rub her hands together, and it was about a kind of energy work and feel, different parts of the body. So I feel like I've always had skepticism about Western medication. My dad never had, we never, he was always reading up on different kinds of plant medicines, always investing in some new, herbal blend. I mean, herbal life. I mean, how many people know about
I
herbal?
remember that.
Interesting, right? I think as a people, I think growing up, I used to always like kind of be like, whatever. It's like this immigrant side hustle that every immigrant family had, like everybody was selling. I don't know, that there was like this whole alternative coffee before, like a mushroom-based coffee. I mean, there's malunga. There's always been like the thing that like I feel like Filipinos were always kind of selling on the side, that I used to kind of not take seriously because of the sales part, because it was like multi-level marketing sort of pyramid schemes. But I think in conversation with you now, I realized that those are examples of the ways that we as a community have always valued other forms of healing that don't come in the form of a pill, and don't come on, like on a script written by a physician. So I feel like it's an example of how these ancestral knowledges continue to be with us, but they do unfortunately take on sometimes other forms that may not be always the best way of getting medicine to our community, but it is trying to get different kinds of medicine to us. But, and, I feel like if I think about my journey, or just, I don't know if it's a journey as much as I've been, I've grown up to believe in healing as happening in a particular kind of way, and I think food and food choices have been a big part of the medicine in my own family. My that was a really big part of our wellness, was being mindful about our food consumption, actually. And I mean, something as basic as exercise, nature, and being in nature, and it's funny, all of these things are only coming up now, being in conversation with you, as I reflect on how did I get to this place, and how do I, at least, address at least my physical wellness, and how much is that rooted in some kind of intergenerational and ancestral knowledges. And I feel like it's so central to how I move in the world in terms of that. And then more recently, of course, I've been on a very specific healing journey, kind of healing my heart and my soul, after, in the wake of Amaro's loss. But Jamie, if you wanted to kind of add more, or just, I'm sure that, when we're in conversation, you and I, it always keeps going. So I'm sure that you might be in a new place in answering this question now.
Yeah, I think with health and wellness, there is this connection to like what we think it should look like. I think there's a connection because our titas, our mothers, our sisters, our cousins are all part of like the healthcare system in the form of nurses, doctors, all those titles. So we kind of go with what we're taught. But, in my own healing decolonial journey, I've learned that like plants have taught me so much. And that we actually are plants ourselves. We need simple things. And I think this idea that we need to go seek it out, it to me, healing is something as simple as, did I drink enough water? Did I go outside and have sun? Am I listening to my body? Am I slowing down enough to actually hear that, wow, my mood swings actually means that I'm hungry or that I need a hug? I think with capitalism, it kind of puts it into hyperdrive that we need all these things. But really, it has been a return back to myself, and also a return back to like this interconnectedness that we need to survive. I kind of like using the visual of like trees and the mycelium, right? So we have our nervous system. And actually, there's studies that show that like our bodies are 30% fungal mass. So we are not separate from the earth. And I think that is kind of like the root of a lot of our illness. And even like the topic of like big pharma, right? I think there's this idea that do we have to choose one or the other? I do have to call out one of my first like spiritual teachers. Her name is Ellie Isaac. She resides in the state of Maryland. She's a 5 elements acupuncture practitioner. And she taught me the beautiful tradition of acupuncture. But she would share with me that she doesn't even need to use needles, that it is her presence alone that really is the medicine. And she has proof of this because of her grandmother, that she would feel the healing power of her love just simply by like her grandmother's embrace. And I think with Western medicine, it has trained us to think that we need to know all the answers. But what if like it really is like in the unexplained, in the unseen? Do we really need to understand everything about a plant? Like I know, like for me personally, the topic of cannabis, right? I think there's a lot of stigma with that plant medicine, and there's definitely like different forms of potential abuse. But if we were to really break it down, right? Like the DSM is like a form of a way to diagnose certain illnesses. And I've learned real quick that is still yet another form of like potentially oppression, an institution determining what health and wellness is. Matter of fact, if I tell my doctors that I use cannabis for my health, they would list me as substance abuse disorder. But the cannabis that I actually lean on the most is a non-psychoactive form. It's called CBD, and also CBG, which is cannabidiol. But I wish our community had a more critical lens about these medicines. I have found that even in myself, like I would listen to these doctors and trust them, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? You go to the doctor, they've had the training, and I'm someone who did everything that I was told. I went to the doctors, I did all the treatments, I had so many surgeries trying to fix the disease that I have, and now I'm disabled because of it. So I'm so thankful that I have the knowledge and the like critical lens to question them. And now I'm very protective over our community to say, like, please open your heart to other medicines, because there's still biases and there's still ways that people can harm you, even if you're doing what you're told. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, as you're talking, there were just a number of things that came up for me. I mean, I think one of the things you mentioned was the idea that some of what it means to access, say, ancestral knowledges around healing is it's so simple, right? Because then that's part of I think both why people don't take them seriously, especially in a Western capitalist context, because they seem too simple. And part of what a Western capitalist context has created is this notion of expertise and experts who stand apart from the rest of the population, who have all the answers, right? Answers in these texts that get consulted for being able to, produce a diagnosis or, and to offer prescriptions, right? So I think that is part of decolonial healing is the work of also decentering Western forms of knowledge, right? The beginning comes with the skepticism, with taking a little bit more seriously some of these healing practices that, yes, but get passed down literally across a kitchen table, concocted in a kitchen with family, that there is a value there not to be, underestimated. And that it ranges from a range of things that can, and I think this kind of came up actually for folks who might have missed our first roundtable talk. Among the things that we talked about at the inaugural roundtable talk was the book by Jennifer Soriano entitled Nervous. So in the book, Jennifer really talks about her own kind of chronic pain, which similar to Jamie, she was on this a lifetime's kind of journey trying to find a diagnosis for. And along the way, did do work in kind of really exploring alternative modalities of healing. And I think really came to an understanding about the ways that different forms of trauma get somaticized or are kind of in our bodies, such that a diagnosis for something kind of physical might be insufficient, right? That we need to look at people in their, broader context, which includes histories of trauma, and not just within their lifetimes, but even intergenerationally, right? So, I think I really appreciate you just naming that part of the process is just these simple remedies, right? Because that's precisely what Kappa's order requires, right? That we there are needs that get fulfilled, by somebody and something else that we have to pay for. And so that's why other kinds of knowledges, if they can't be fully monetized, fall up, then kind of get delegitimized. I mean, one of the things though, too, I think that's striking is also your comment on cannabis. It's interesting because I remember very distinctly conversations my dad would have around cannabis when we were much younger, just around kind of like commenting on what a shame it was that this medicine was being so abused in an American context, And then I remember, when we were older, just of course, then it was like, don't ever, if either my brother and I maybe got caught smoking, like that was going to be a thing, And then later, though, as he was in the last years of his life, when he was diagnosed with liver cancer, which actually had to do with hepatitis, and really, because in general, my dad had led a very, very healthy lifestyle, though he also had lots of stress. So I think there's a issue between hepatitis and different forms of immigrant stress, I think, and just the burdens of, I think, Filipino masculinity as well, with all of it. He ended up getting liver cancer, and he sought cannabis as to help ease the pain when it was at its worst. And so, I think you're right. There continues to need to be a conversation about it as a medicine, but I also think we have to have, and probably one of these roundtable talks has to be a conversation about addiction. I think we have to talk as a community about alcoholism, various forms of addiction, especially kind of different forms of drugs that are an issue in our community that often don't get talked about or addressed, the various kinds of addictions that plague us. So, we can circle back to that at another time, but absolutely just kind of really being able to talk about cannabis in a way that doesn't have to have it shrouded in, this in pathology and stigma. Go ahead, Jamie. I can see that you're.
Yeah. I just have two comments, both about the addiction piece and also on cannabis. Just I do have to say, having a decolonial approach, even to seeing the harms of being here. I've been saying this a lot, like even my disability, even me being unwell. I've been saying it with acceptance that that's just what it means to be here. So my idea even of addiction has shifted because we all in the empire are addicted to something because we are trying to soothe ourselves, whether it be food or coffee or, we have to really think about that because, yeah, I mean, I will admit, I have vices. I love sugar. But I also do want to call out, there are people that are trying to really educate the world about cannabis. And I have to call out someone who I consider my teacher, which they go by the name of Dr. Magpie Shields. They're a queer, non-binary Asian cannabis researcher who's also chronically ill, and that has shared ways to really embody or have a more embodied approach with cannabis and use it as a form of therapy. So I really would recommend that if you guys are looking into cannabis research with a decolonial approach, again, Dr. Magpie Shields, they have shared something with me, which, there's a lot of hype around, I think, psychedelics right now and plant medicines. But I love what they've said and shared about the real role of all of these medicines is something that's called oceanic boundlessness, which is the feeling of oneness. And to me, that is a beautiful word for kapwa, which is this idea that we are all connected to each other. And I love that they've shared it in this way because whenever I feel like I'm in, this zone and I feel like I'm back to my body, I do feel that. I do feel this oneness with myself and with others. And to me, that's actually what health represents. And wellness.
Thank you for that, Jamie. I'm going to turn us now to a different question. What would you say are some of the practices you have engaged as part of your ongoing healing repertoire?
Ooh, a number of things. I think, again, what plant medicine has taught me is that it's so many things, right? So I think that's where the problem lies with pharmaceuticals and the Western medicine approach, because a pharmaceutical is one thing. It's meant to do one thing and really target that. And if you think of your body as kind of this like beautiful act, this like balancing act, right? A pharmaceutical will take that one thing and work on that one symptom, but it kind of imbalances everything else. So for me, really understanding plants as energy, and even just something as simple as, okay, I'm feeling pain. I need to sit with myself and I need to rub a balm on me. And I think there's this like misconception that balms are, like just something so simple again. But if you really break that down, a balm is plant medicine in a concentrated form. And it's also combined with touch, which I think is also, something that we're very disconnected to, whether it's touch with a lover or family or even with ourselves. So that's kind of like my first line of defense, is just sitting with myself. It's coming back to my breath. Music is also a huge element of my healing practice. Whenever I want to disassociate or feel stressed, I have to listen to music and also sing. There's also a lot of talk right now about like the nervous system. The gateway to the nervous system is the voice. And I've said this to you, Robyn, as Filipinas, I think we express our anger in two ways, right? It's yelling and karaoke. And I think there's something to it. There's a way for us, there's a need for us to really get that out. And if you're looking into like the old ways of, like for example, traditional Chinese medicine, the idea is that certain organs in our body hold certain emotions, and the liver actually holds anger. So I've been really kind of connecting to that as well, because I think as growing up as a Filipino American, I've, you know, made myself very small, trying to fit into like mostly white spaces. I grew up in Sacramento, um, which was once the most racially integrated place in the world. But it's also interesting because, um, yeah, if you're in this space and you're from Sacramento, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. Um, and then also art therapy has been really healing for me too, and it's been really um really personal. I discovered that my grandmothers were both weavers of Inabel. Inabel is a Ilocano weaving, and it's so beautiful. And to me, the ability to like hyper focus and to look at colors and to know that all the hard work that I'm doing, even if it's something as like simple as weaving, which actually is very complicated, at the other side of it, I have something that's really tangible and soft. And I know that will stay, with like future generations. I still have blankets from my grandmother that, I know is a form of her, and I can like wrap myself in it and feel her presence. And to me, that's medicine as well. Um, and food, cooking. Whenever I'm angry, I have to like do something with my hands. So yeah, cooking and then playing in my lab, making plant medicines. Those are all have been really healing for me.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting as you're talking, when you talked about the liver, and anger, it's funny that my dad keeps coming up today. He's probably actually the energy that made us focus on the money. Because that is like one of the things he was, I think, often very frustrated and angry about, actually. And I wonder if part of, that energy coming from my dad is actually in just next week will be 10 years since he transitioned. So, the body always remembers. And I think, this is a way of me remembering that particular moment. But it's interesting because, I didn't know this about the liver in particular and its connection to particular forms of emotion. But my own hunch, my gut feeling with respect to his liver, even though this is a man who, really was incredibly healthy, didn't drink, didn't have very many other vices, was hyper aware of everything that he took in, exercised actively, and that he would die relatively young at only the age of 67 of liver cancer. Thinking about voice, when you talk about how, Filipinos manage anger, my dad was the biggest yeller in our household. And then also the hug of the karaoke mic. I do think processing that, I think better, it's so hard when you are the child of an immigrant, the first to be born, first generation to be born in the US, that it's hard when you're living in an immigrant household. You're managing your own way, right? As a young person, you don't really have the tools to fully understand, I think, the traumas our parents bring with them, the traumas they experience of being brown people in America. But I can imagine, that because he felt like he had no voice, because typically my father, was hyper aware of his accent, and ashamed of it. I often, when my mom wasn't available because she was working a lot, had to be that translator for him. I can imagine the kind of frustration he felt about being voiceless, how that could also be emasculating since he had to depend on his eldest daughter, and how then kind of the yelling, right, was the only way that he could fully express, just so many things around his anger that wasn't even probably about me or the family, but about so many other things, in fact. And also why, our most joyous occasions as a family were, doing karaoke, It's funny because I was shy about it for the longest time, and partly because my dad always did hug the mic. I mean, why even try? So I think I actually probably did karaoke more after he passed. Maybe that, like, if I would just sort of think about my own timeline. So it's sort of interesting to think about that. But, I think when I think about my own practices in terms of ongoing healing, I mean, I do continue a lot of those sensibilities, those understandings, that knowledge that was passed on by in my family are really still important to me, are still a part of my practice. I try to be very intentional about sharing those knowledges with my son, my younger son. And I think um, teaching, of course, when you're growing up is sometimes by observation and kind of indirect. But I think I've tried to be much more intentional and explicit in the teachings as I pass it on to my child, especially coming from the Filipino tradition. But I've also been learning from my husband, who's Hmong, and really also learning and appreciating a lot of the various healing practices at the center of his culture, which range from, interestingly, of course, similar kinds of foods believed to have, kind of healing properties that are really kind of at the core of our diets. So we're actually learning right now from a Hmong medicine woman. She's teaching us various plant medicines that we can cultivate on the farm. The other hat that I wear as a farmer. And and I remember, in when we visited her, our first visit with her, she talked about just the collection of herbs that she just ate every day, as opposed to, say, a vitamin or some other supplement. It was this mindful kind of adding of particular herbs to every meal. And so, I think that's also been now a part of my own healing repertoire. I mean, of course, I'm continuing to heal from grief. This has been several since 2018 with the loss first of Dr. Don Mabalan, who was a dear friend. It with every few years has been a very sudden and traumatic loss for our family. And so that had to do a lot of, work in my heart. I mean, I do see a mental health. I do go to a therapist on a regular basis. So that's definitely a part of my healing, and definitely farming. I think reconnecting to the land has been completely so instructive in ways that I'm still not fully able to articulate in words. I think, sorry. It is catching me, but I think that yeah, I still don't have the words yet, and one of these days I will, to describe what being in relation to the land has done. I'm gonna take a pause, guys. I need to just pop this up.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Hope in the pause, people were able to do some reflecting. So please, everyone, if you have something you want to share or a question that you may have, please share it to the chat. As you can see, Anna has been sharing some of the resources mentioned. We have an exciting, just someone sharing about being also from a lineage of Ilocano weavers. So beautiful stuff. Interestingly, I have sewing in the Ilocano side, but it's weaving on the Bisaya side. But so yeah, so make sure that you do take a moment to do that. So yeah, actually, it's here. Okay. Thank you so much, Heather Rose. What do you think about the intersectionality of disability justice and ableism within the Filipino American community? Some scholars say it's just as damaging as racism and is linked to it. Essentially, our bodies are the foundation of it. is linking this to the trending topic of healing related. Like, why do we need so much self-care? The system is what is not taking care of us, and it's often seen as moral judgment, like focus on our bad decisions. Yeah, I wish, Heather, we could hear you. Actually, it's hard. I'm reading the comment and I feel like I can interpret it in lots of different ways. That might be different had you, if you were
I can talk
to say
about
it.
it.
Yeah, if you feel comfortable with that, Heather, please. Thank
The
you.
topic of disability justice in terms of intersectionality is a newer topic for the Filipino community, so I was just trying to kind of talk about it more.
Mhm.
The foundation of it is it's essentially our bodies and the exploitation of our bodies, the environments that are poisoned by capitalism and imperialism. And then the often like, well, we'll do all these things like eat this way, do this and that, but the not connecting it to that, to the overall oppression is kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, do you think
Mhm.
we talk about healing, I don't see it when I'm in conversation with people. I just see, oh, I'm doing my best, or I did this, or but seeing that link, I don't know if that question is clear.
No, I hear it because I think it's a comment actually, in addition to a question, right? Which I'm hoping would love just to hear, because I think that your comment is basically like, let's stop talking about self-care, guys, because it's a system. Is that what the comment really is, that you've turned into a question?
Yes, but also
Mhm.
how do we integrate that in conversations about healing? Like the decolonization is, I feel like it often gets lost.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, do these things that are helpful, and they're wonderful, and I do a lot of stuff that you guys talked about, but it's also like it hasn't been working, and when I linked it I suddenly understood things
Yes.
more
Different.
in depthly.
Yeah, I hear you. And yes, and I should provide context. I mean, that's exactly why we even hold space for the conversations around just broadly healing justice in a Mato Kaya initiative, right? Because for two reasons. So one, I mean, for myself, as somebody who identifies as a longtime activist and community organizer, where, everything was always centered on dismantling various systems of oppression, various systems of power, right? It was about bringing down, and a big part of my life has been the National Democratic Movement, where it's always like, imperialismo, ibagsak, feudalismo, ibagsak, burakata kapitalismo, ibagsak, right? Which is imperialism, take down feudalism, especially in a Philippine context, right? Take down bureaucrat capitalism, or kind of like state corruption, right? Take down. And I think that this was true for, I think one of the things I learned, and this is something that a motto as a person who was also connected to that and other movements really brought to my attention, is how we were not talking about issues, particularly around mental health, in this work. So in other words, we can name the system, but how these systems are taking hold of our bodies, of our minds, these are not always things that we were talking about with much frankness. And so for Amado, that was something that I felt like his generation of activists, or just he in particular, really brought to my attention. And he had said it once to me, and he was really active actually in the Filipino Mental Health Initiative in San Francisco. And he had basically said, part of the issue for those of us who are in the space of social justice work is that we're holding all of this collective trauma of our peoples. And so, and we're not necessarily, one, talking about how that collective trauma holding is re-traumatizing us and traumatizing us. And two, kind of really grappling with the various traumas that we've experienced within the context of these systems, and how that has impacted, our hearts and minds, our bodies. And so, that's why, I really wanted to prioritize this conversation within this space, a space that I think of as kind of having these roots in these activist kind of genealogies, but trying to center a conversation about healing in place where it may not always be happening, and vice versa. Actually, Heather, I think, and you're absolutely right, because, and actually, the next question I had for Jamie, it sort of touches, I think, on the comment you have. But one of the things, has been this proliferation, right, of not only a culture around self-care, but then even in our community, like a proliferation, like everybody is a healing and wellness practitioner. It seems like, I feel like everybody I know, I turn around and somebody is something. And then not only just a healing and wellness practitioner, but even, kind of positioning as one engaged in a decolonizing healing and wellness practice. And I think, part of what we were going to talk about, we still can't talk about, I think, is exactly the same point you're making, Heather Rose, is that there is something that's a little bit kind of at least for me, I will say that I've been feeling nervous about with respect to that, because on one hand, I believe it is, oftentimes this idea, right, that, or you're talking about care without talking about the system. Or even you could talk about the system, but the invitation isn't also to engage that either. I mean, I think that, at least for me, when I haven't talked about the practice of activism. I mean, I think part of my own healing journey, frankly, started with activism. That was the first place for me to give me the language to be able to address the things, the many, many things that I had experienced and continue to experience in life. And also recognizing that my activist practice was also not giving me some of the tools that I needed, in terms of, the healing work I still needed to do with myself. So I don't know, this is just sort of, my own answer to this, Heather, and I thank you for posing the question, comment in the chat, and also unmuting so we can kind of hear your thoughts more on this. And thank you again. So I want to pick up on another comment. I really love how you both were reflecting back on your relationships with family as you were navigating what healing means, looks, and feels like as you keep going. And what came to mind was the sense of practicing trust with the people we love about what will be beneficial for us, which makes me think about the many times where we are often told in Western medicine that these emotions and trust with love and healing can't be trusted as medicine, right? Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Sam, thank you for bringing this up. Heather, definitely so tired of hearing just work on self-care. Yeah, no, I mean, I would definitely be in agreement with that. And I think probably Jamie as well. It's also so interesting with the Filipino community, the idea that the next generation is going to take care of us, but with zero consideration of working on current mental, physical health and what we can do to minimize what future generations will go through taking care of us. And then Anna, he's thinking of family and generations, you both, Jamie, Robyn, also young children. So what does talking about health and wellness look like with them? Well, thank you, Anna. Have your kids themselves taught you anything about health and wellness or change your own point of view and healing? Ooh. I guess this is for you, see. You're supposed to be listening. Underneath my desk right now.
Can I share something? So it's going to connect kind of everything. Shout out Heather Rose. She has played a huge role in my healing journey. It is because of her sisterhood that I like to say that I'm still here. Because of people like her. And she's taught me a lot about even my own disability, like this idea that it's something that I'm doing to myself. And I think a lot of us Filipinos feel that way, which is why there is this hyper, proliferation of these like healing practitioners, right? Because, if it's something that we're doing to ourselves, then there's something that we can do to combat that. But really, actually, what I learned from Jen Soriano's book, Nervous, is these things have been in motion for generations. There's even a research that I just saw. I forget who told me about this, but people who have experienced famine are more lineages who've experienced famine are predisposed for diabetes. So this idea that like what we eat, is affecting our like ability to get diabetes, like no, it's all been in motion for generations. Now in terms of like the question that Anna posed up for us, my daughter is my greatest teacher. In Jen Soriano's book, I think I was so attracted to that book because she shares her journey with chronic pain, but also with something that's called selective mutism, which is what my daughter has. And she's taught me like, it's not something that I need to fix. Maybe that's just who she is. And even being in conversation with someone like Jen, I'm even realizing that this anxiety disorder, is it really a disorder, or is it something that I really need to pay attention to and help her embrace as a gift? Because really, it's also a way of like processing and being very, very aware of what's going on around her, what she's hearing, what she's witnessing, what she's feeling through her body. And the response with her is that she just chooses not to speak. And, I think earlier on, I wanted to like throw like medication, let's go see a therapist, let's do that. And, I think just like trusting that she's right where she needs to be, there's nothing I need to change with her, has actually helped her anxiety. And it's helped mine too, because I'm also realizing like, this is my child, we are connected. What she feels, she's, I have to like really allow her to feel it. And I think that is the difference, right? Whereas I think growing up in an immigrant family, like we are told what to feel, what to think, what to say, what to do. And I'm so honored to be her mother so that, I can learn from her. And I hope that what I teach her is that she can trust her own body and her own mind. So.
Yes, thank you for that question. And definitely, I think, as I was sharing earlier in response to Heather, my eldest child was the first to really push me on kind of thinking about mental health and wellness within social justice spaces. For this younger one, it's a constant learning every day. I think that part of it is even just being able to center their knowledges, or his knowledge and his perceptions. And I think, as Jamie said, so much of at least my own experience of growing up was that, we were told how to feel, and we had to, comply. And, there were just things that were inappropriate to feel, and we were not allowed to feel them. And I think that one of the important part of our own healing, or my healing, and then healing intergenerational trauma, was to stop that, to actually really take him seriously as a partner, as part of our familial unit, as somebody who has valid feelings, has valid insights and knowledges, and has something to share. And so I feel like every day he challenges me. Bob, hey, mama. Just the other day, it's funny how he also mirrors back things I'm learning. I think one of the things I've had a really hard time learning is how to create, healthy, but loving boundaries. I think that so much of my upbringing as a Pinay eldest daughter was, this demand. There was a demand for selflessness that came from so many different places. And then later, I think, came, even with the activist spaces I was part of, and even my choice of profession. And so, I think that there was a way that I was always extending and have always extended. And I've had trouble knowing how to not extend and understanding that not extending doesn't mean a complete withdrawal of my energy in the world, but recognizing that I still have to, preserve, my energies for myself if I want to continue to give, right? Hard lesson. And so, Z has often heard me talk about the importance of boundaries and has invited me to really think about that lesson. And I remember when he the other day just telling me, Mama, sometimes you just don't know how to put boundaries, put up boundaries, but it's okay. It's really okay. Because he was also worried about sort of just the ways that I was extending myself. He was saying, Mama, it's really okay to say no, right? He told me that the other day. So every day I'm getting a lesson. Did you have something you wanted to say? I know you love to talk and share your story. Do you want to say something about
I'll
that?
try not to say anything because I'm usually not supposed to talk this much. But I really think I am. I should.
Okay.
I like to say a few things. We've been taught all these ways of the Western. Sometimes we don't even remember what our own stuff is. We're so colonized in that way we can't even do anything. Most kids don't know that. Like if you go to school, you say, "Oh, George Washington's so good." Well, he did build a thing which slaves made, so technically it's them.
Oh.
So it's good that a lot of us here know what we're doing, know what our culture is. Otherwise, we're nothing but like, I forgot the word. Colonized. Which I shouldn't even know this, but I do because my mom's an activist, and that's very good.
There you go. There you go. There you go. Thank you, my boyfriend.
Oh my gosh, I love hearing you say that.
Oh, thank you, Z.
See, Auntie
Thank
Jamie's
you.
proud of you too. Oh, we have a question. Thank you. Let me go ahead.
All the time.
Okay. That's a Joy's question. Go ahead, Joy. Hi, Joy. Did you have a question? Oh, I don't know if that was an inadvertent hand up.
Oh, they said
Whoops.
they're trying to clap.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, my bad. They were trying to clap. Yes. Okay. Oh, here's another question. Thank you. Okay. So I know in so I know in Western medicine, there's a more clear path of becoming a health practitioner with expertise, right? Like going to medical school, getting licensed, becoming a nurse or doctor, et cetera. What are your thoughts, recommendations on how to intentionally connect deeper to our indigenous healing practices such as herbalism, et cetera? Especially when many traditions have usually been passed down orally. But as a child of immigrants, I feel disconnected from many of my ancestors, passed away, live across the ocean, the world, language barrier, especially because my parents work in Western healthcare. How else can I explore this lineage with a less clear, direct path? Thank you for the question. Do you want to go ahead and take that, Jimmy, to start?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I feel so tender listening or reading this question because I think this is a mirror of my own journey. I didn't learn a lot of these practices from my own lineage. I take that back. I didn't learn from my parents, I should say. I started connecting to some of the traditions of our culture and understanding, like my grandmothers, for example. I was actually very afraid of my Mama Mary, my grandmother on my dad's side, because she was an arbolario. And for me, growing up as like being Catholic in the church, I was like afraid of that because that's what we were taught. And then I became disabled and unwell and started to realize like, oh, wait, there's something to that. And I feel like my relationship deepened with her after she passed. And I'll just say it, like, we don't need these institutions or even this like formal way of learning. Sometimes it is as simple as like stumbling across like a book or a little like blurb of information, and then kind of going deeper and really developing a relationship to that plant. And I also feel as if like once you take a step on that path, the path will appear for you. I know that sounds corny, but I think it's true. Because I believe spirit and our ancestors and the divine they got you. So as far as it being a clear and direct path, I don't think that's what healing really represents. I think it is a long game. I think it also kind of goes back to this idea of like expert, right? Like, do we need to be experts? I don't know. I think even in the like stories of your body, even in the lived experiences of your life, like those are our teachers as well. And I think we've forgotten that,
Yeah, thank you for this question, B. It sort of links to this question that I was going to pose to Jamie that sort of got posed, which was this comment on the proliferation of, kind of healing practitioners. I sort of said it already earlier. And along with kind of a proliferation of sort of decolonial healing practitioners has been also kind of a proliferation of various kinds of courses and other kinds of, learning opportunities, some of which lead to actually, I think, certification in some cases. And yeah, I mean, I think there's not an easy answer for me. I mean, I have personally been a little bit nervous, as I mentioned already before, about this proliferation. I think I very much share kind of Heather and other people's kind of just critique of self-care, right? Because of course, before the proliferation, I think particularly in our community, self-care has been a kind of capitalist mantra, right? But it's only self-care so that we can just recharge to plug ourselves back in again, right? I mean, the kind of care that might require us to completely disconnect from the system might be called crazy, right? Like my journey, yes, to walk away from a nice, cushy academic job to be a farmer, which was part of my healing process. I think still people are like, what the fuck? I'm thinking it too, just kidding, but not really. But I do think that there has been the self-care industry, and then now almost a kind of industry with respect to kind of decolonial healing. And I don't think that there's an easy answer. I don't think there's a pure way to go about it. As long as we are enmeshed in this system, I think it will always be complicated. But I think that part of what would be important maybe is to always kind of move forward with certain kinds of, I guess, just a kind of framework, I guess, right? And that framework can be that it is listening to kind of, as Alexis has sort of posted, right? Kind of following synchronicities in our intuition is an important starting point, I think. Listening to our bodies. I think that's also another important point. I think having just a constant critique of the systems too, right? That may and how they operate, and be mindful that whatever kind of spaces we enter, to what extent they do or they don't kind of become spaces for reproducing these systems in new guise. As an example, something that I feel a little bit nervous about is, that part of what people think of as decolonial healing journeys is to kind of go to a teacher. And there have become an emergence of sort of, sometimes self-designated kind of teachers who might claim a particular kind of lineage or whatever. And there is a way that a kind of authenticity politics is sort of at play. People claiming elder status, claiming sort of specific kinds of, lineages. And I've been a little bit wary of some of it because I feel like sometimes I've seen it used in ways that feel like they're only reproducing the dynamic of expert, i.e. doctor, but now in the guise of healer, reproducing a power relation as opposed to a relation that's more lateral and much more mutual and more community. And collective. So those are sorts of things that I feel nervous about when I see certain kinds of assertions of certain kinds of titles, expertise, lineages, and et cetera, that I feel like, again, in the guise of being decolonizing, at least for me, there are certain kinds of things I also don't want to reproduce. I don't want to reproduce patriarchal relations. Because it is also true that some of our indigenous cultures, we're also deeply patriarchal. I don't know that I can, I want to live in a world that reproduces those kinds of forms of relationality. So at least that's for me kind of where I've been kind of, when I'm moving in space, trying to really kind of pay attention to these kinds of things, but I don't think there's a clear and straightforward sort of path. Right. The trend of healer is of capitalist appropriation or spiritual practices. Yeah. So I think, Jamie, you had a comment, and I don't even know, what is our time frame? Are we supposed to end? Because I think the original program was 5:30 to 7. We started at 5. Oh, yeah, that's right. An hour and a half, 15 minutes. Thank you. Did you want to, go ahead, Jamie. I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I just to kind of to go back on that question that you posed, and I think Heather answered it perfectly. I think at the end of the day, it is repeating the same cycle. And if you scratch the surface, whoop, there it is. It's capitalism. And we have to be really careful about how we're engaging in these spaces, especially the healing space. Goop is another good example. Do we really need crystals and all that? Really, I think that's kind of what's been in my practice. It's here, it's in our bodies, and I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to share, I actually had a complication yesterday. I was seen at the doctor's, and something went wrong. And, I think using my own knowledge, the Western model is to go back to the doctor. But what if that's where the harm happened? And I'm trusting now in my own body that I can heal from what happened to me yesterday. I had a complication with a particular surgery, and they wanted me to go to the emergency room. And, I think a lot of people may cringe at the idea that I'm denying myself of going to the emergency room. But, I think we forget that we still have agency in our own bodies. And again, we don't need to I think it's okay to question the people that are at the top, whether that's healer or doctor or nurse. That's what I'll say.
Thank you so much for that, Jamie. Another, Trisha, thank you for this conversation as a creativity and death doula. I also am very cautious and wonder about these identity, expert politics whenever I work with new clients. How can people know what we represent without these titles, without knowing us one-on-one, right? You're right. Thank you so much for that. It's such an important question. I think this is hard, and this is where I think, maybe part of decolonization is that relationship process, right? because capitalism functions on transactions, quick ones, and that maybe decolonial praxis requires a different kind of time frame, which then requires, relationship building takes time, trust building takes time. But also, I think this is where it becomes hard too for people who've chosen this path as a means, as a livelihood as well, right? There's still the demands on us by the system. And so how do you do that? And I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, I do know that there's something important about, I think, our individual stories, that if we, part of, I feel like decolonization is valuing our individual unique selves and the cumulative sum of our experiences, and that each of us uniquely will necessarily have a very different way of being in the world. And if we choose to be healing practitioners, a very different way of being able to facilitate people's healings. And I think, that is maybe the thing that we share, that can't be encapsulated in the title, right? Because it becomes a story, and it becomes, a space for kind of much more of, having to share in that way. So I don't feel like I have an easy answer for it, but I also understand why, there's a need to create some kind of language around it, as we try to describe what we do, even as we're also not trying to reproduce the power dynamics that come with expertise, right? Jamie?
Yeah, and thank you for that. I feel too like the remembering of the knowledge in our bodies, right? I don't like the idea that we are going to other people to explain what's happening in our body when and then the whole idea that like other people know more about our bodies than we do. We actually know. And I think because of capitalism and imperialism and all the scary things in the empire, that's disconnected us from even listening and understanding what's happening. So I know that we're nearing the time here, but I think I want to leave you all with that, trusting your body, trusting yourself. Yeah.
And we definitely are approaching time. I definitely want to keep the chat open, and we may not be able to answer any additional questions, but they may become the basis for future roundtable talks. Thank you, Sam, for the message. I had to keep moving. I don't know if people can see, like the sun is following. So I'm like keep having to move and move. But I think we're kind of coming to the close. I don't think we'll have too much time to talk more, but I will invite folks to please, if you have a particular topic that you feel like would be a great one that we hold space for, put it in the chat. Also, again, I've been joking, it's kind of like if you listen to public radio, and they have like the drive when like every other in between every programming, they're like, asking for folks to make a pledge. And I am also inviting you as well. I think that it's not all, I don't know how much people know about the kind of labor it requires and resources it requires to continue to do the work that we do here in Amatapai, and even, of course, before when we were the Bulusan Center. It really does require commitments of investment from us as a community, which can come in lots of forms. Of course, dollars helps. It's not the only way. In fact, please do look out, because we're going to be pulling out a call for volunteers, for folks who might have some time they're willing to invest in the initiative, if not monetary or other kinds of resources. We are in the middle of a collecting putting out a community survey. It's specifically for folks in the Sacramento region. So if you live in Sacramento County, please take the survey. That'll really help us in terms of being able to provide programming and services in person, as much as we do a lot of virtual programming. Amado Kaya has really centered its work in communities in the greater Sacramento region and the Central Valley, because these are the sets of communities in the Filipinx community that have typically been underserved. So we're really trying to change that by launching the survey and getting a little bit more information about how we can better serve Filipinos, at least in SAC, and we're hoping to extend this beyond SAC into the Central Valley and other communities. So the other thing too is the next program that we'll be having later on in the month is our presentations from our Amplify Fellowship. So over the last year, we had a fellowship called Amplify, Activating Media Positively Leadership Institute for Filipino Youth. Sorry, I just love acronyms, and I was very proud of making up that acronym. Amplify, Activate. So we had the Amplify Youth Fellowship. So we had fellows over the last year who were working specifically on podcasts, showcasing the impact of COVID-19 on Filipinos, including just kind of our community's resilience during the pandemic. So many still important lessons from that time. Sometimes we forget it wasn't that long ago. And so the fellows are going to be sharing their projects. We're hoping to launch a second year of this fellowship. We're keeping our fingers crossed for a grant. Excuse me, that would allow us to launch the fellowship for a second year, but actually focus on domestic violence in our community. So we're really hoping that works out, because it's an important topic too. Yes, Heather, thank you. The pandemic isn't over. And I think this catch in my throat fragrance is long COVID. It's extremely sensitive. I've been so hypersensitive, I think, since I've contracted COVID to any kind of dust and anything. And so I find myself in these coughing spurts, but thank you for that. Yes. I think many have returned to normal, but the pandemic is very much here. But we are going to be doing this fellowship presentation at the end of this month. But with that, I'm going to close the program. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Hope to see you in future spaces. Thank you. See you all soon.
Are you okay?
Almost gone. Okay, Jamie. And that's a wrap. And this, yeah. Thank you, friends. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.